The issues for Japanese surrender, again, I mean, by the time you get to June of 45, the Japanese emperor is like, okay, this is not a good thing. And he's trying to preserve, what makes Japan Japan. And of course, one of the big issues for him is that he wants to he wants to continue to be the Japanese emperor. The Japanese military, on the other hand, believes that it's fight to the death, right? Because for the Japanese military, that samurai tradition says that you don't ever surrender. Most Americans at this point, by the time you get to June of 45, the fighting's over in Europe. Most Americans just want this thing to be done, right? And they're upset at the increasing casualties. Again, the casualty rates just keep going up. And while they don't really want to have to negotiate to allow the emperor to continue to have some authority, primarily if you think about the propaganda that emerged in 42 about how awful the emperor was. We still to this day kind of struggle with what culpability the emperor had in all of this. But ultimately, most Americans just want the thing to be over. And the biggest issue is going to be that we've developed the nuclear bomb, right? This whole process, the Manhattan Project, had begun as far back as like 1939, when you have Leo Szilard writing a letter and getting Einstein to write a letter to Roosevelt saying, hey, we need to try to create this bomb because, the Germans are probably going to try to create it, because the Germans had actually created the initial research and technology about fusion or fission or whichever one it is. And so what will happen, though, is that the Germans will kind of dismiss it because there were Jewish scientists involved. And so they're, oh, well, it's Jewish technology. And remember, Himmler is convinced that anything Jewish is awful. So they kind of they dismiss that. And then you have scientists that escape in the late 30s from Germany, and among them being Einstein. And so they start to be very concerned about what if the Germans use this technology. So they encourage FDR to create the Manhattan Project. So we're starting to develop this nuclear bomb, right? So you have the Manhattan Project in Chicago, or in Columbia, and then Chicago. And then you're going to have, there's a whole backstory, because it started in the Columbia University professors, and then they develop it in Chicago, and so forth and so on. So they end up going out to the Nevada desert, right, to Los Alamos, and that's where they finally do kind of the major construction of the project. So this being said, right, so we get to the Potsdam Conference in July of 45. Truman's there. This is the first time he's meeting with Churchill and Stalin. And Truman and Stalin do not hit it off, okay? First off, the Soviets have been spying on the Los Alamos project, so they know about the nuclear bomb, but they're not telling the Americans they know about the nuclear bomb. And Truman's not telling Stalin about the nuclear bomb. So it's kind of the secret that everybody knows that nobody's talking about. And so you also have happening at the Potsdam Conference, Churchill has been kind of voted out. And he's being replaced by a new prime minister. So at the Potsdam Conference, you've got Truman as a new president. You've got Churchill as an outgoing prime minister with the incoming prime minister. And then you've got Stalin, right? And, Stalin doesn't tend to play well with others. To what degree he really played well with Churchill and Roosevelt in the first place is up for debate. But what we see is that the Soviets have not been following the agreements of the Yalta Conference. First off, by July of 45, they have not declared war against Japan. And they are not showing any signs of doing so. They keep finding delay tactics. And yes, well, we're trying to recover, and there's such this big distance and all this kind of stuff. And then you get to... also the fact that they're not allowing free elections in places like Poland, for example. And they're trying to encourage communist parties, and they're not allowing elections to happen until a communist party is very solidly in control of certain areas. And Truman and Great Britain are saying, wait a minute, this isn't what we agreed to. And then the Soviet Union is refusing to do those things because they're trying to insist upon massive reparation payments from Germany. Now remember, the reparation payments are part of what triggered this whole thing in the first place, going back to the Treaty of Versailles. Now, to be fair to the Soviet Union, the Germans had cost them quite a bit in lives and in lost equipment and property and all this kind of stuff. So the Soviets really do have a legitimate complaint. Okay. But that being said, Truman and Britain don't want to agree to the reparations, so the Soviet Union's not agreeing to declare war. They're not agreeing for the free elections, and you've kind of got this whole big, we just can't seem to get on the same page issue. And of course, Truman and Stalin particularly don't like and trust each other. And so Truman doesn't say anything about the nuclear bomb, even though the Soviets kind of know that the Americans are developing it. I don't think they realized how close we were to actually dropping the bomb. So when we do actually drop the bomb, that's a bit of a surprise. And so you just need to be somewhat familiar with the Manhattan Project, the 1939, the role of Einstein, the Los Alamos. And that the first test of it is in July of 45. We drop it by August 9th of 45, right? So we don't wait very long from the time we have the first successful test. And again, it was kind of a big debate, right? Whether or not we should do this. Is this a human rights violation? What can we do, right? But I would suggest to you that the massive American casualties, as well as all the indications of the way the Japanese had been preparing its own people for the invasion of the mainland, you didn't really have a whole lot of choice, right? Truman does issue a Potsdam Proclamation that basically says, hey, Japan, surrender now, or you're going to have prompt and utter destruction. And so the Potsdam Proclamation will kind of threaten, not threaten, but issue a warning to the Japanese that the military refuses to follow. So August 6th, not 9th. 1945, the Enola Gay drops the first bomb on Hiroshima called Little Boy. Massive destruction. Then 3 days later, they drop Fat Man on Nagasaki. Now, Nagasaki was not the original target. I don't remember what city was. It wasn't Tokyo. It was another city. So basically they can't, so they choose Nagasaki as the second target. But even then, I mean, you can see the numbers, 200,000 people dead, just like almost instantly. Massive amounts of destruction. And so what's going to happen is on August 9th, the Soviets will finally declare war on Japan. How convenient, right? So they will declare war on Japan. What will happen then is on August 15th, Japan will surrender unconditionally, although there's an asterisk next to that because it is unconditional surrender, but there's every indication that the emperor is going to be kept in power. And of course, it is the death and the destruction of the atomic bomb, plus the pressure of the Soviet influence that's going to really push the Japanese to give up. And this iconic picture of two people that we don't know their names from what we call VJ Day, which is the surrender of the Japanese. And so the war is actually over. So you get to mid-August and the war is over, and you see by Labor Day of 45, they're starting to lift some of the restrictions, some of the rationing, and you start to see some of the conditions of an improving economy. Because remember, the Americans, things have been rationed, things have been tightly controlled. We've had almost almost full employment. So people have pretty large savings accounts, right? So you're going to start to see kind of the prosperity that will mark the 1950s begins pretty soon after that. Now, a couple of last concepts. First off, you do have, going back to 1944, you do have the first, remember that it was at the Yalta Conference that we start to really kind of define the United Nations. Now, the initial kind of getting together to discuss it starts in 1944. You have kind of this idea of a general assembly where all member countries have a vote. They vote on resolutions, so all member countries have a say in the resolutions. They choose the non-permanent Security Council members, and they vote on a budget. Okay, so think of it kind of like the House of Representatives, if you will. But then you're going to have a Security Council that has 11 members. 5 of them are permanent, of which the U.S., Great Britain, Soviet Union, China, and France are all members. And these allies have a veto power on any action. And you have to have a unanimous vote of the permanent members in order to have a military intervention. So the Security Council investigates international things, and they take action to preserve peace, and that kind of thing. So be sure that you're kind of aware of that, this idea of internationalism that emerges. You're also going to see that this is where we get the Axis on trial with the atrocities. So you do have the Nuremberg trials that hold people to account. You also have an international military tribunal to hold the Japanese accountable. And kind of, so some of these things are brought to light, but again, the focus is really on moving past that, although there does seem to be a little more emphasis on the Nuremberg trials. By the time you get to the International Military Tribunal, again, the tensions with the Soviet Union are creating an issue. So the big conclusion is that World War II lays the foundation for the world as we know. It establishes the Middle Eastern relationships. We have the foundation for the United States and the Soviet Union and those tensions. You see the Iron Curtain, NATO, Warsaw Pact. Those are all things that we're going to be talking about. You also have the United States as a superpower. The atomic supremacy is going to be a big deal. And we continue to have lots of prevailing questions about the United Nations. How effective is it? Does it work? That kind of thing. And then you can see this kind of shows you the Western Bloc. So I'll kind of come back and revisit this when we get to the next part, when we kind of talk about this bridge into the Cold War. I'll revisit this particular issue. But that's it as far as kind of